boy Montoya Smith, aka Black Socrates. All I ask is that you think.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's your boy Montoya Smith, aka Black Socrates, and welcome to this special edition to Just My 3 Cents podcast. Obviously, I'm in a different location. Again, this is a special edition podcast. I typically say a live, interactive, rapid fire podcast where you can interact, but not today. On the special edition, this is my first time having guests on the show. So I'm going to go ahead and bring my guest live. Got none other than Queen Maria Lloyd and my brother and King Michael Suttlar II. Thank you both for being with me for this special edition, Just My 3 Cents podcast. Today's topic is courting, choosing, and cheating. We're actually doing a reactionary, I guess you'll call it a reaction video, if you will, to a broadcast Michael sent to me a while back. Just want to give everybody out there listening a little backdrop to what we're doing today. And we hopefully don't keep too much of your time, but I hope what we do is just as interesting to each of you listening as I think this is for us. I mean, Michael wouldn't have sent it to me if it wasn't something he was interested in. But to give a little backdrop, if you're a first-time listener, we have the Mental Dialogue Community Club, which includes the Mental Dialogue talk show every Saturday morning. So we've built up basically a virtual nationwide neighborhood where truth seekers, if you will, or I like to call Michael an intellectual outcast. And so now I've stolen that term, so I named it for him. So I say for the intellectual outcast, a place to have real conversations on race, sex, culture. That's what we specialize in. And so today, to do it with two of the smartest people I absolutely feel like I know in my entire life, Maria and Michael, is an amazing opportunity. And y'all are absolutely worthy of being my first guest, because I don't think I'll be doing this too often. Typically, we're Wednesday night, sometimes Thursday night if I'm tied up on Wednesdays, and I allow people to jump on. And that's been working pretty well the last few weeks. I've been having 3 or 4 guests just jump on to whatever topic we were discussing. Again, always in reference to race, sex, and culture, if you will. And so today's show, again, courting, choosing, and cheating, a reaction to the Huberman Lab podcast number 48, where they were discussing basically the evolutionary psychology and neuroscience of how we as men and women choose short-term mates, long-term mates, and even extend to how some or why the genders cheat based on the science. We now understand for very different reasons. And I'll say this there's a lot of things that we've generalized about what that looks like. I feel like this podcast ended up backing up a lot of the science. But Michael, if you will, again, because you sent it to me and I was so interested, I was like, man, let's turn this into something. So again, I would love to just hear what was your original thought in sending it to me, because I assume a lot of the dialogues that we have, as much as you tune into the Mental Dialogue talk show, a lot of times I wish the stuff we talked about would get on the show. So I thought this was an opportunity. But what made you even send that to me in particular?
I guess you would say, can you hear me?
Yes, coming through loud and clear.
So I guess you could say, it was for me. I think one of your podcasts was, or we were talking about like the rise of like the Kevin Samuels, this phenomenon, because he all hot and spicy. And, it's funny. I've had so many conversations about Samuels, people of that sort, relationship experts, even back, if you go back farther enough, you go back to Steve Harvey. And to me, I tend to roll my eyes at a lot of it personally. Like if I look at it, I'm like, how do they not get this? But that to me is a very self-insulated kind of viewpoint. So it took me a step back. I was like, well, what were they hitting at, or what is the appeal other than the shock value of Samuels that brings into these things that I think of as what I call universals? There are some things in life that, regardless of how you believe what you believe, and I always say gravity is one of them. You don't have to believe in gravity for it to be real, But I think when it goes to like humans and personality and relationships in particular, we at some level understand how important relationships are, but we don't seem to understand anything about how they created, why they are, and the changes in dynamics. Because again, being human, and we tend to like consistency. We always, when I flip a light, I want that light to come on. When I turn on my car, I want that car to come on. But humans ourselves, we are anything but consistent, except for some of these gross trends that happen in relationships. And so I always like to look at like human history as a past. I would think history is a cheat code, and I lament anybody who doesn't look backwards, to say, hey, what have we done in the past? For what, as far as we know, because information is incomplete. But if you can make informed discussions or informed decisions based on what has presented itself already, which is the point of research to me, you have a better leg up at understanding not only yourself, but the world as a whole. And that's kind of my thing. I want to understand myself, but also my place in the universe as well.
No, I love it. Again, this was a fascinating video for me. And again, I wanted to do more with it. And so again, I was amped at the opportunity to have both of you on. So Maria, she recently I told her I was going to start this way. So I sent her the video, and we got some clips lined up for everybody out there listening. We're going to share our favorite clips so that y'all really understand the backdrop of what video we're talking about. If you're on Facebook, you actually can see the link to the actual video that we're reacting to, just so y'all know. But anyway, getting the opportunity to speak with Maria, matter of fact, you showed all this in the text. We had a group text, so she highlighted a perspective about how she, in a sense, in general, saw the information that was being presented in the research. And I personally said I saw it very differently, and so I wanted to share why I saw it different. And I was curious to how you saw the information as well. And then, of course, Maria, correct me if I'm wrong. Just just to highlight this. But when you saw the information, you were saying that it was very curious, very interesting. I'll let you share what you said to me. Share what your thoughts about the information. And I did a terrible job of it. I don't normally have guests on this show, so I didn't even think to introduce y'all, which I normally do on Saturday very properly or whatever. But I didn't even go back and try to get no backgrounds or anything like that. But go ahead and just share what you thought about the information, and then I'll just tell you what I thought about it as well. Go ahead, Queen.
Yeah, sure. So like I said, I mean, it's very interesting, definitely makes for a great conversation over dinner or group parties or whatever, kickbacks. But I found a lot of what he said to be kind of flimsy. Like, basically, he was talking about, especially when he started getting into like poly relationships, which, for full transparency, he did admit that's not necessarily his field of expertise. But I felt, okay, if that's the case, like, maybe you shouldn't talk about it. At least not in that setting, since the whole point was to talk about like relationships and love. But I just found that the research was a little flimsy. Like, some of the stuff dates back to like the 90s, which we know, the way that we approach relationships and dating today is completely different from the way we did 10, 20, 30 plus years ago. So again, very interesting. I'm looking forward to kind of diving into this a bit more, especially hearing it from you guys, you men, your points of view. But overall, I was just like, okay, so this is pretty much the same cyclical conversation I'm having amongst different groups, where it's like men do it this way and women do it this way, and this is why we do it. It's like, it just, to me, there's no real point, because ultimately we're so dynamic. Human beings are so incredibly complex. Like Michael just said, we're constantly evolving. And so there is no like one size fits all. Like, there just isn't, in terms of attraction and preferences and things like that. Because honestly, if there were, then I think that we would all be like happily attached to somebody. But I mean, we're not, because there is no kind of framework, if you will, that will help us figure out like, okay, why am I attracted to this person? Why is this person a good fit for me? Like, I think those things just kind of evolve over time. So whatever, like, for example, with me, what I found attractive in my 20s is completely different from what I find attractive at this like stage of my life. And I'm sure when I turn like 40, 50 and on up, it's going to be totally different. So again, very interesting conversation, and I'm super like happy to be here and have this, but I'm also like, it's just a fun conversation. I don't really look into it. It's kind of like astrology for me. Like, I love astrology, right? But I mean, Is it real? I don't know, maybe. So that's how I kind of approach these dating and relationship conversations.
Okay. So
This is good.
I would
This is
offer,
good.
I'm completely surprised at that assessment. I'm going to offer that I personally think there's bias here based on what you just said. You approach these conversations this way. And the reason I'm saying, yeah, which is a great dialogue. Again, I don't want people on here just thinking the same thing. However, this particular thing, I'm completely shocked that that's what you receive from it, because what I appreciate about when scientists introduce information versus when, most of us, we're information gatherers. Like, we'll use the word, like myself, I'm an information gatherer, but we'll say we researched it and we're researchers, far from being an actual researcher, right? So what I always appreciate, because it was Dr. Buss was the, he was the, just to get some clarification here, Dr. Buss was the evolutionary psychologist, and then the actual Huberman, he's a neuroscientist.
Right.
So what I appreciated very much about the presentation of the information was that they were absolutely distinctive when something they were saying was database and when it was not, which typically the average person does not do. And so they were walking us through that which was data-based. And even when you're saying someone was from the 90s, it was mentioned it's been peer reviewed since that time, and they revisited this, because the study, just to get some clarification for those out there listening, we're going to talk about, and we're going to play a clip so that y'all really understand exactly what we're talking about. But I just wanted to set this baseline because I was shocked that was your viewpoint of this actual scientific data, because what I've always said, just in general about conversations, when whatever the most comprehensive data is, and I always like to be real clear about this, whatever the most comprehensive data is not reality. However, it can point to trends that you can sometimes make informed decisions on. And so when you label the most informed data out there as flimsy, then there's nothing to go on. And I'm just highlighting that because I saw him distinctly saying, this is database. No, when he said, I don't know. So when you lead with, I don't know, he's letting you know this is not data back. And then in one time, he even actually used the words, and we're going to play a clip right after this. He actually used the word about the polyamory stuff. He says, not enough data. Here's an informed speculation. Like, that's not something the average person is saying. A scientist is being very clear to just say, based on what I think, here's what I think. So he's not presenting that as a data back, but he's just answering the question, because he made it clear the guy asked the question and he says, this is an informed speculation based on it's not my area. So he's just saying, well, since you asked me, here's my opinion. So that's what doesn't happen in general conversation. People like to present stuff. Go ahead.
Sorry, I want to cut in really quickly. So I think that is what happens in general conversation, right? When I ask somebody for their opinion or what are their thoughts about any given topic, I'm already assuming that they're speaking from their own lived experience. Like, I'm not assuming that they're speaking from any other experience but their own, unless they tell me otherwise. So
let me get clarity. I didn't mean that. What I meant is the average person doesn't distinguish if they bring in their research, their gathering of information. Most people try to present it and don't make a distinction of, here's what I'm saying that's data back and here's what's not. That's the distinction that doesn't typically happen in the average conversation. So because the Dr. Bass throughout the 2 hours constantly kept distinguishing, here's what's data back, here's what's speculation. And when he said, I don't know, it was to say there's no data. So that's, to me, that matters if we're going to call the actual data back stuff flimsy, because he tried to say, here's when it's not, here's when we don't know. And so if we're going to have dialogue about the data back part, but we've already labeled it flimsy, was just eye-opening to me that's how you saw the video. Michael, your thoughts, and then we're going to play a clip.
I mean, for me, easy. Like, I love the fact that it was Maria, again, because we already know her intellectual acumen. Like, that's one thing I'll start out by telling people who aren't familiar with me. I don't like to talk to people who I don't find credible. That's call it elitism or whatever you want to. But when it comes to Maria, having, interacted with her at all is like her credibility, again, A+ right off the jump. So for her to say, hey, this flimsy data, and I was with you, I'm on the camp, I'm like, oh, it's, I went to data myself. I was like, oh, this study was over, this period from the 90s, but he also went back and get some historical context that goes back almost 5,000 years, yada, yada, yada. His in sample data point was like 10,000, 30 some people, whatever, 37 cultures, and I stopped and I went, wait a minute, Maria's looking at something else. So I wanted to interestingly go, like, to me, I'm like, yeah, this is valid. This is something worth talking about, which is why I brought it. But now I'm so intrigued as to like, well, why would Maria say this is
absolutely, we want it
irrelevant? Because there are other people to some lesser degree that are like her that say, hey, I hear what y'all are saying. This stuff doesn't do anything for me, or there's got to be something else. And I'm, like I said, I find this usable. She finds it not. I want to know what's the in between and what's
that's what we're about to find out. Yeah. That's why I was worthy of setting that backdrop.
Yeah.
And I was curious as how you saw it, because I saw it as usable based on what he said was usable. I don't take his speculation as usable, but it's just worthy of discussing, if you will. But let's go into one of these clips. Michael, you actually have the first clip. I'm just doing them in the order that they come. So for everybody out there listening, we're just going to hear the clip like we hear the clip. And then we're going to have dialogue. Since this is yours, you're going to take over. Just so you know, you take over the discussion because it's your clip. So you can ask us what you want to ask us, share what you thought from it and why you picked it. So let me play this clip.
You can pay attention.
Let me know if y'all can. Just let me know if y'all give me thumbs up if y'all can hear it, because I'm just going through the mic.
Value improvement therapy.
It's a little low, Montoya.
Whatever qualities led to success in these same-sex battles, those qualities get passed on in greater numbers. And so you see evolution, which is change over time, in increase in frequency of the characteristics associated with winning these, what Darwin called contest competition. And we know that the logic of that is more general now and involves things like, in our species, competing for position and status hierarchies. So anyway, so intrasexual competition is one. But the second, most relevant to your question about mate choice, is preferential mate choice. That was the second causal pathway. And the logic there is that if members of one sex agree with one another, if there's some consensus about the qualities that are desired, then those of the opposite sex who possess the desired qualities or embody those desired qualities, they have a mating advantage. They get chosen, they get preferred. Those lacking desired qualities get banished, shunned, ignored, or in the modern environment become incels. And so the logic there is very simple, but also very powerful. And that is that whatever qualities are desired, consensually desired, if there's some heritable basis to those, then those increase in frequency over time. And so, and in the human case, these two causal processes of sexual selection are related to each other in that the mate preferences of one sex basically set the ground rules for competition in the opposite sex. So,
all right, Michael, I hope I can try to turn it up. So I hope it got a little louder for you guys. All right. So Michael, your thoughts, what made you pick that selection? Again, for anybody just tuning in, this is the Huberman Lab number 48 conversation, basically covering evolutionary psychology and neuroscience. Go ahead, brother.
So what really brought me to that was really simple. And it's an overarching theme for me, is that in this age of information, in this age of, social media, where we talk about so many things, and I know this gives bias to my background, it gives bias to how old I am and how I live my life. Again, we all carry some sort of bias to every conversation we have, but given my biases, given the way I've lived, with the decisions I've made, those that I haven't, one of the things that has, to an annoying extent, to me, when we're talking about relationships, when we're talking about, y'all both know finance is like my cornerstone, because I think finance is an embodiment of the measurable amount of worth somebody has. It doesn't go into the character and all this other stuff. I really wish it did. But when you look at society as a whole and we go, oh, well, in my generation, we did that, or my parents' generation or grandparents, and we look at this long stretch of humanity, the thing that seems to escape conversations to me is that it boils down to a competition at some level. men are competing for women, women are competing for men, and even if we were to get into other types of same-sex relationship, there is some level of competition. The human animal, and I do stress that part, the human animal is not so predisposed as to be so high and so elegant that we are above these subconscious drives and urges, which I will tell you a thing that I've learned now treading into my young 40s is that so much of my life has been driven by a subconscious element that I was not aware of, where I'm going, I'm academically this and I'm this, and Mike makes his own rules. There's been something ticking behind me that's been steering the boat the whole time to a great, not in totality, it's not a 1 or 0.
Okay.
So my interest in all of this is going, well, how many other people that are not in relationships like mine, or at a point to where I was unhappy in my relationship? Granted, I've been in a long-standing relationship. Next month will be 15 years with, again, the woman of my dreams. How that dream has played out looks nothing like how it started, But if I deduce down to the things of how we came to be, how we almost not came to be, to having kids, seeing life completely different people. When I say she's completely like her motivations, her triggers are wildly different from mine. That's to a point, and I've come now only after 15 years, and I do mean truly, only after 15 years, I've come to appreciate that, going, well, damn, there is something, I didn't do this. So was it all luck? Well, luck over a long period of time tends to avoid the actual definition of what is luck. So there's some type of design or process that has kept us together. And then I looked at my parents, her parents, both of which have been married in longer than 40 years. Our grandparents, who were also long-standing, had been married for a long period of time. And I was like, we lived in completely different eras, but if you calculate it all up, we've been married for collectively over 100 years. If you take that, how in the world does this come to be? And not looking at, again, my excellence, or, my wife's a doctor and I'm an investment man, all this stuff. Looking at the bare bones of me on a basis of our errors. How, in spite of my errors, have we come to non-randomly stay together and now see more eye to eye than we probably have, and I don't know when, since we were, again, rosy-eyed youngsters in our 20s. How does that get to be? How is that replicated? Because clearly there is some replication process there. And what can we extract from that to say, hey, this is usable? And I'm going to be selfish. We have 3 girls. How do I train these 3 girls to have the best chance, not certainty, how the best chance to pass along the life that they get, so they get the best relationships that they want? It does not have to mirror my wife's, which again does not mirror my parents, or definitely not our grandparents, but to adapt and change without going, well, I don't know what's going on, because I see my friends, I see my interns and some people that I mentor going, I'm lost. And I'm going, well, how are y'all lost if I made it, there's some, I didn't make it on my own volition. How is it that y'all are missing this thing? And I go, well, what is the thing? So the whole thing was about me defining what that thing is. And it always take it back to.
Let me jump in real quick, if you don't mind, because I'm trying to relate it to the clip. And so as you went through that entire process, if I'm hearing you correctly, because it sounds like, because that clip pointed out just the idea of competition and how much it leads to who you come together with. And so is that kind of the sticking point that as you go through all that process, is just realizing that to a degree there was a competition, if I'm understanding correctly, even for my wife, and to a degree was she in that same competition without me, maybe unknowingly? I don't know if that's kind of you started there. Your thoughts, Maria, about that clip in particular? Anything that stood out on that clip?
I mean, the whole notion of competition, like Michael said, that is very prevalent amongst the animal kingdom, period. We all are competing at some level. And so I definitely agree with, for what it's worth, I definitely agree with that. And I do see that in all factions of human interaction and engagement, and especially as it relates to dating and relationships. So yeah, I mean, I think that clip is on point.
Yeah, it was just, I mean, it kind of stated the obvious, but I don't know if we were able to say it like this. If I were to simplify the clip or whatever, and I don't think sometimes, and I think in today's time, we don't like to concede to this, but sometimes when people get to going back and forth in the gender conversations, if you will, right?
Yes.
When the people get to going back and forth, like at times people admit that sometimes we try to figure out who's the driver of what, right? There's always these dialogue of who's driving the whole situation of who we come together. And I remember the best way I've ever heard it said, and I'm going to bring it. I didn't think I was going to bring this up, but I'm bringing it up because it was fun. It was funny. So one of my partners did this amazing play called Educated Gangster. And there was one part in the play where it was having a conversation about who, in a sense, drives relationships and drives the conversation. And so there's always these dialogues about, quote unquote, who women are choosing, right? There's always these conversations, you know, what type of man is she choosing? She should choose this, or she should choose that. And in that play, they had this part where he said, if women like men in pink walking around in pink bunny suits, all the men would be running around in pink bunny suits. And so I thought that was hilarious in the actual play. But it highlights that clip is that at the end of the day, what we are seeking, that as you might say, I'm seeking to be these things on my own. But in reality, you're trying to get the nice car or the nice dish for who you might attract, even though you might think this is what I want. So that's just something that stood out in that clip for me, that it just points out, admitting that both sexes, even though we like to say, I'm doing this for myself. The reality is when it comes to mating, you're doing typically some things for the opposite sex. And then I would like to highlight in that particular clip, it pointed out, which has become a kind of relatively new term for me, the incels, which I took that, just highlighting that, is those who have gotten so bitter in the competition process that now they remain to themselves. And then there's a reality that we're starting to hear that term, and to highlight some of what you talked about when we start talking about these different gurus out here talking about these dialogues, where they're really attracting a lot of people who, in my opinion, become incels due to their bitterness, because they're upset about this real competition that has always existed. Any thoughts from either of you on that? And then I'm gonna play another clip.
Yeah, from me, for the most part, like I said, I always wonder when I see people complaining about, you know, the problems in dating, or I can't find anybody, and I always do. You know, I wonder, I was like, well, do you absolutely know what you're looking for? And again, very recently, a young man, I keep it disclosed, but when it came down to it, he didn't have a clue as to what he's looking for. And I was like, brother, this is a very educated young man. He's very ambitious. I was like, you've gone this far to play the game. I was like, granted, the clock started the moment you were born, you know, but you've gotten this far and you don't know what you're looking for. How in the world can you impress upon somebody else what they might be looking for if your behavior is random, you know, or you know, that sort of thing?
I would take it a step further, though. I think this is where the value is in even having this dialogue. See, the value is not even just what you're looking for. That's easy to a degree.
You would think, right?
To a degree. Some people don't know, so that's definitely have no shot. But even deeper than that is, if we're absolutely honest about there's a competition, then your frustration is, you know what the parameters are. It's you personally deciding whether you're going to meet some of those parameters in order to increase the opportunity for a situation. I think there's dialogue out here that tells people sometimes not to do that. But I think it's so far from the reality, in my opinion, so far from the reality. So for that same young man, it would, in a sense, he sets, in my opinion, based on the dialogue and the science, he sets himself up better, becoming more what's desired. And that becomes easier than just simply what you want. Because as you become more what you desire, better chance you get what you want. And that's something that I think creates incels, in the sense that you don't meet the value system in your culture, because that can vary around the world and what that might be. Different things are valued in those cultures, but I think that's a reality to people coming together. And most people fail, in my opinion, and I failed at this as well, to focus on themselves enough to get out of that space of becoming an incel, which I think is normally men. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if there's a name for women who that stay out of the game, or get out of the game, out of business. I don't know if there's a name for that. But anyway, any last thought on that? And we're gonna play another clip. You know,
so what I was gonna say earlier, Montoya, you said something about Like we may sometimes make certain decisions or do certain things not knowing that we're doing it to make ourselves competitive. And I would argue it could be both, right? Like I may genuinely, for
Right.
example,
Yeah, fair
I
enough.
genuinely aspire to live a very healthy lifestyle. Now, from a dating perspective, that gives me a competitive edge, right?
Absolutely.
As I'm getting more toned, I'm getting more fit, my body looks a certain kind of way, right? And so that gives me a competitive edge in the dating pool. But also for myself,
Right.
having
Fair enough.
a fit body, I have more energy. I can do more things, right? I can fit clothes in a way that looks good to me. So I think sometimes we get caught in the dichotomy space, right? Where it's
Right.
like
Right.
one or the other.
Right.
But there's a very high likelihood that, you know, people are doing both. They're doing it for themselves because they truly want that for
Right.
themselves.
Absolutely.
And they're also doing it because it gives them a competitive edge as
Right.
well. And then there was something else you said. Oh my gosh, I forgot just that quick. I think it was about the person making themselves more attractive in the dating pool and like how their self-esteem takes a hit, so they just, you know, they just accept that like they're dejected or whatever. But I would say even in that space, like people who are in that dejected space, they're still competing too. They're just competing at a different level, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I've always felt that mate selection is really a it's a good kind of understanding of that person, like how we choose to be acquainted with the type of person, I'm sorry, the mate that we choose to be acquainted with says a lot about us in terms of where we are in our life. And again, kind of using myself as an example, I just think about some of the men that I dated in my 20s versus those, you know, later on in life. It's totally different
Why?
because I was in totally different spaces in each of those phases in my life. So I think that's it in with regard to that clip.
I want to come back to that because
Go
you
ahead.
said that initially, and I thought to myself the same, like it just slipped out. I was like, why? Because I don't know if that's a, you know, a Maria thing or it's, you know, a man woman thing. But I know for me, again, it's that range or that ideal,
Mm-hmm.
you know, outside of Rihanna, that's pretty much been my range has pretty much been the same. You know, like she's an outlier, you know. But even in choosing that outlier, you know, I would say Rihanna's worth like almost $2 billion. It still fits my thing that I was looking at in my 20s for a long-term partner. Now, again, if we talk about the short-term stuff, it does vary a lot, but I wanted to know specifically, I mean, this personal curiosity, I'm like, is this a one? Because again, it's like one of those things. Do I want to know about women? It's like, do women change that much? Is there much more variability or what? So yeah, I'm all ears.
I mean, again, I can only speak for myself. Like my shifts. So jokingly, amongst all of my friends, we always say I'm the equal opportunist in the group. Like, if you lined up every guy I've been in a relationship with, I think people's mouths would drop because they are so drastically different from each other. Now, the only consistency is that I am very attracted to smart men. Like that is the fundamental consistency across the board. But even that is nuanced, right? Because one guy may be smart as it relates to arts and, you know,
Right.
performing arts and things like that. Another guy is smart academically. Another guy is smart in terms of survival skills, right? So even that is nuanced. Like, yeah, I'm attracted to very intelligent men, but what kind of intelligence? And I think again, it speaks to where I was in those phases of my life. You know, in one particular phase of my life, I was very much interested in getting into the music industry. So naturally, I was attracted to this guy who I felt was one of the most talented and just, you know, phenomenal performing artists, right? So
Mhm.
it's very interesting how, you know, personally speaking, my interest in men has evolved, but there is still that kind of fundamental consistency where it's like, well, they aren't all smart, but smart in their own way. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, let me
So
throw this out.
it's
Oh, go
really
ahead. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, I'm finished, Montoya. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the only thing I want to say is if I'm listening to that, if your friends call you the equal opportunist, then to this dialogue about the nuance that I think Michael's asking, it seems like you end up being somewhat of an outlier since they pick on you in that manner. Because to a degree, I would agree that a lot of us fundamentally have an ideal thing that we are quite often aim for. And I'm just wondering, you know what I'm saying? So were you, or do they consider you the outlier?
Okay.
So yeah, so you're almost the outlier because they are like you. It's not that vastly different. That's why yours is such a shock. So I'm just saying that's a relative way to answer this based on what I'm hearing you say. Just throwing it out.
So it's interesting that you bring that up because in my circle of like women friends, because I have equal amount of like women and men friends. Like I have men that, you know, I put them on the same level as my girlfriends, right? But nevertheless, like as much as they may even believe that they have a type, interestingly enough, their dating options have been very diverse too. Like they may want this kind of guy. They may want the, you know, 6 foot, slim, you know, athletic built engineer, right? But over the time that I've known, and you know, that's another thing about me, my friendships tend to span over decades, oftentimes.
Right.
So over the time, you know, the time frame that I've been fortunate enough to know these people, these women in particular, a lot of the men that they've dated aren't necessarily the same either. So it's like,
so let me just throw this out because I'm not naive to that ends up being a reality. I'm not naive because that ends up being a reality for most humans if you date several people. So I'm not suggesting that. I'm highlighting the fact that they label you the equal opportunity still shows that your experience is still different than theirs. In their differences, they still look at yours as like Maria's the equal opportunity one. So I'm just throwing out that for them to call you that shows that there's a difference for you to be called that. I was just letting you know that in your own circle, that's how I receive you being named that. Just throwing that out.
The experiences are not different. It's the desires. Like they desire the same type of man, but their experience is in complete contrast of their desires. Me, on the other hand, I don't desire any particular, I don't have he has to be 6'3" and
that's what Michael asked you about. So it's the desires is what he's particularly asked you. He asked, does your desires change over time?
Yeah.
So there.
Okay, but I thought y'all meant in terms of like who they actually end up with.
He said desires. So that's how you became different. Your desires.
Right, correct.
And he was curious to find out is that a woman thing or was it a Maria thing? And based on what you explained, it sounds like a Maria thing.
It sounds like a Maria thing.
You explained.
Yeah.
So I was just throwing it out because that's what he asked specifically about. Your desires.
The desires. So okay. And I was thinking like you all were asking in terms of who actually ends up.
No. He was saying desires.
Okay.
Yeah,
I got you.
His framework has always been Rihanna, but I bet his dating history ain't women that look like Rihanna.
No, but you know, the funny thing is,
that he asked about.
Yeah, the funny thing is for me is like if I have a template, I tend to I guess sort of like what your friend's saying, if there was always these pretty intangible things, but I always had to cook. I was more selective than a lot of my peers, lot more selective. And, you know, in some, I guess it's like some regards, I can say I could because of whatever elements, you know, those I choose and those I don't. Some that are random to me, unknown to me, I was able to be selective. But I was wondering again from a woman's perspective, because I hear a lot of women say, I've heard this before, and it's weird to me being a man, not being a woman. They're saying that they take what they can get. And I'm going like, well, how is it? Because y'all got y'all got the juice. Well, how would you be, you know, not selective? I have this overarching theory based on just evolutionary stuff and some other things that the woman, no matter who she is the protector of human DNA. Like the way your body is built, everything, how you've come about, the woman's job is to protect the DNA for the next generation, whether she has children or not. But and so it's like, to me, I see it. And again, it's a competitive mindset too. It's like, so if you're going to choose a woman to mate with for the long term, which again is not really part of the whole mammalian structure, I need to make sure that I pick one that is also, and hopefully she chooses me too. And that's been my take, you know.
All right, sounds cool. Let's go to the next clip. I think I got it turned up loud enough, so hopefully we'll be good to hear it. And this is Maria's clip.
Humans is that we have mutual mate choice, which is not true in all species. So, and that is that it's not just a matter of you selecting someone to be your mate, they have to reciprocally select you. And so with mutual mate choice, we have both preferences, mate preferences that women have and mate preferences that men have, and consequently competition among men for access to the most desirable women, in competition among women for access to the most desirable men. So that's sort of a little bit of theoretical backdrop. So you asked, well, what are the qualities that men and women desire? And maybe we'll start with long-term mating and then shift to short-term mating. And long-term mating is interesting in and of itself in that it's very rare in the mammalian world. So there are more than 5,000 species of primates, of which, more than 5,000 species of mammals, of which we are one. But the percentage of mammals that have anything resembling like a pair-bonded long-term mating strategy, it's about 3 to 5%. It's extremely rare. And even our closest primate relatives, the chimpanzees, they don't have a long-term mating strategy. They don't have anything resembling pair-bonded mating. And in the chimps, the females come into estrus. Almost all the sexual activity occurs during the estrus phase. After that, males and females basically ignore each other for the most part, with some exceptions. But with humans, you have the evolution of long-term pair bonding, attachment, heavy male investment in offspring, relatively concealed ovulation, and so these are kind of unique aspects of the human mating system. So to get to your question,
Maria, that's your clip. So go ahead and give us your thoughts behind selecting it and anything you want to ask us about it.
Yeah, so the reason why I selected that clip is because I know now, and I know that they mentioned this towards the end of this podcast episode, but now it's very common for people who, identify as poly to bring up the fact that like this whole long-term bonding is like not, it's not innate for us. Like it's something that we're just doing. And so what I wanted to say to that is like, I don't necessarily think that automatically makes you poly. Like to me, this conversation is this particular part of the clip is very similar to how like when we're 18 years old, people are pressuring us to make a decision about what we want to do with our lives, right? It's like, okay, when you get to college, you need to pick a major and this is what you're going to do for the rest of your life. And to put that kind of pressure on someone, especially, at 18 years old, but just to kind of have that kind of pressure, it doesn't make sense to me because, again, we're constantly evolving. I feel the same way about relationships. I don't necessarily think that because we may not, some of us or whatever, may not be hardwired to have long-term relationships, it doesn't mean necessarily that we're poly. It just means that maybe for 10 years we date or are in a relationship with this kind of person. For the next 10 years, we're in a relationship with this kind of person, and so on and so forth. Like I tell people in terms of my profession and my career, I've broken my life up into chunks. So in my 20s, I wanted to do a certain thing with my career. I achieved that. In my 30s, I wanted to do a certain thing with my career. I'm doing that now. When I get to my 40s, I have a whole nother thing I want to do. And then when I get into my 50s, 60s, I have a whole nother career that I want to pursue. Right. So I think that, but like in terms of relationships, if I do that, that doesn't make me poly. It just means maybe in this particular decade, I'm with this type of person. And in this decade, I'm with this kind of person and so on. So it doesn't necessarily mean I'm polyamorous though. Right. And so I just wanted to bring that up because again, I hear this argument being presented all the time or frequently, not all the time, but frequently when people are trying to argue like, oh, I'm poly and we are all poly and da-da-da. It's like, I mean, and that doesn't necessarily make you poly, but sure, you like variety. And there's nothing wrong with liking variety, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be with all those persons at one time. You may just need to be with this person for this phase of your life and that person for the next phase and so on and so forth. So that's why I chose that clip, which I just realized now I'm like, oh my gosh, it was pretty much just like the clip in the beginning, just like the clip that Michael selected. It was very similar.
Yep.
I probably should have cut it down a little bit, but yes. So that's why I chose that. And I would love to hear you guys' thoughts about this.
One data point that you bring up, about this phase and this phase, and it's something he's talked about too. You hear it a lot of time. If you talk about the Scandinavian countries, especially in the modern era, you know, uh, we talk about their quality of life as being superior to even that in the United States, they're also being very wealthy, but also a very homogenous, society. But the one thing I find that's interesting about all of that, even though they follow that Western European hegemony, all that, and I kind of roll my eyes to that to some degree. But the one thing that stands out amongst them is their take on marriage and the permanence of marriage is so divergent from us. And it makes me wonder, like, because I even know a few people from that region that, again, for a while they were rearing some children up to a certain age, that they were, again, committed, monogamous relationship. They shared resources, whether it was from the intellectual, mental, social, emotional, financial, all of that. Then they got of a certain age, the objectives changed for the woman and the man. They divvied up how they wanted to see the children. I've even known one case where one child went one way, one child went the other way. And I went, wait a minute, this kind of like blows my own mind. And still to this day, they're both very successful. They're both older now. And one of them has, forked on again to another relationship, almost like the same what you're saying about your career.
Yeah.
It didn't have the same deleterious, impact that it would in the United States, where, where you got married here, divorced, married here, divorced, married here, or had baby mama, daddy drama, and it fractures things. But it made me think more on the inside of how we're talking about the long-standing human thing versus the American style, again, very capitalist style. This is our society. This is the game we play with. This is the game within the game that we're playing, right? How is that different? Because I bet what works, like you said, to the point, what works here, or what the general game plan or framework here is wildly different from somebody, even if they just separate themselves geographically or culturally. That's what that just popped into my head. As soon as you said that, I was like, whoa, that's dope.
So yeah, what I think of, it's funny, we just did a show just to highlight this. I think our last, just my 3 cents, or the one before, sometimes the show started running together for me. But I did a show on polygamy versus polyamory. And so it was fun for me to do the show because typically people are pitting monogamy versus polyamory, right? And so the show is unique in pitting those two things. And so, somewhat to your point, while I think some of the history that I've studied, in addition to this video, if you will, I don't mind. I think early history, especially when you go to early human evolution, that I always offer to people that humans are naturally polyamorous based on early human development. So I would offer that, but I say, however, to people that are putting it out there the way that you're talking about, Maria, because I talked about it on the show, that people are being manipulative with using it the way that you mentioned, just to create a situation for themselves. So that's very different than, even if you agree or disagree, that humans are, in a sense, naturally polyamorous. And then I talk about the history of why monogamy even came to exist in a lot of cultures the way that it did when you start thinking about for the children. And that's kind of why humans even became monogamous, from an evolutionary, this gene to this gene, and taking care of these people in these various environments, because we now have land to protect, because early humans just moved around nomadically.
Right.
So that speaks to the innate ability, in my opinion, of us, or even the example you use, even a 10-year period to the 10-year period to the 10-year period, if that ends up being 3 different people, for example, that still speaks to the natural not being monogamous for a lifelong bond, because it ends up being, even if it's just those 3 for a 10-year period. So that may, to a degree, speaks to what we naturally are, which is possibly naturally polyamorous. But on that dialogue, we definitely battled this idea of that, saying we're buying into some construct that's not naturally us, just for the current benefit and manipulation of the day's time for somebody to get what they want. So I hope I'm making that clear here, that I feel you for people that are using it in that manner, just to say what we're doing now is completely wrong, because people are doing that. I don't know if that makes sense.
What's the distinction for the unlearned here? What's the distinction between polygamy, which I get that construct, but polyamory?
Cool. So polygamy absolutely includes marriage. That's what polygamy is. Whether that be let me say if I say it right, polygyny, which is the man with more than one woman.
Right.
And then the other one, if I say it right, is, you know how to say it? Maria, I always try to say
Polyandry. Yeah, polyandry versus
polyandry is
yeah.
the woman
Right.
having more than one husband.
Mhm.
But either way, marriage is a foundation of polygamy versus polyamory. Polygamy falls under polyamory. Polyamory does not have to include marriage whatsoever. It could be all type of alternative lifestyles that could include marriage or could not. But polygamy and polyamory are not the same thing. So
Gotcha.
that was part of the dialogue that we were having. If that
Appreciate that.
But I do want to make one distinction, or else I want to be corrected.
Okay.
I don't think what I'm saying though is poly, right? I'm still monogamous, but I'm just monogamous over a period of time with this person. And then poly, to my understanding, again, correct me if I'm wrong, is having multiple relationships simultaneously. That's not what I'm saying I'm interested in, right? What I'm saying is I'm in monogamous relationships, but I'm with different people at different phases of my life.
Mhm.
So
No,
I just want to make sure we make that distinction, unless I'm wrong about what poly is.
Yeah. So I was just highlighting when you were saying that some people like to point to is poly using that 3 to 5%. So when you were pointing to them using it as if we're not innately monogamous, they're trying to say that humans are innately polyamorous. I'm just highlighting from a natural scientific point, even you moving through your monogamous periods shows that humans in itself, we're not naturally bound to be in long-term relationships. You can choose it. That's a choice versus it's not natural. It's the only thing that I'm highlighting. If that, I'm just trying to make the scientific distinction between that you're absolutely monogamous in your 10-year period. So I'm not rooting that out, but I was just highlighting that early humans, for the most part, were very polyamorous. And so for the most part, as animals, we're probably still polyamorous naturally, but there's a whole bunch of factors why you would choose to spend 10 years with one person, or, you know, if I'm, or Michael's spending lifetime with his dream. So there's a whole bunch of other factors, but sometimes some people try to manipulate that as if to say what Michael and what you're choosing to do in that 10 years is wrong because it's not natural. Some people choose to manipulate it like that.
Right.
And I'm just saying there may be factual in our natural state, but they're manipulating it to their own favor to suggest that you being monogamous for 10 years is somehow not natural. You see what I'm saying? Like,
no, I get what you're saying. I just want to make sure, you know, make sure I'm also clear on what I'm saying, which is I'm not poly, but you know, but I do look at monogamy, and I feel like it's one of my friends said something I felt was so profound recently. He was saying that people need to honor people's expiration date, and so that's kind of how I look at it too. Some people have an expiration date. And so you've got to honor that. But there's one other thing I wanted to, I guess, ask, and that is just for clarification. What is defined as long term? Because admittedly, I didn't go and actually look at Dr. So sorry, his name escapes my memory. But
Dr. Buss,
yes, thank you. I didn't go and like actually read his abstract or anything like that. I didn't go look at anything. So I would be curious to know, just for the sake of contextualizing this conversation, what is defined as long term?
So go ahead, Michael.
I was going to say, from what I read, it was a life cycle, at least one generation of offspring type. So again, you're anywhere from 18 to 26 years.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah. And in short term, I thought it was just reference to hookups and, you know, people that casually with or whatever. They just kind of, because they definitely made a distinction on how, you know, men and women move between what a short term like and versus what a long term looks like, if you will. All right, let's play another cut here. All right, let me make sure it's not that one. All right, here we go.
So when it comes to forms of sexual violence, high dark triad guys tend to be perpetrators of this. And so, like most men, I think would be find it ethically abhorrent to sexually harass, say, a woman in the workplace. Dark triad guys, in part, maybe they feel entitled to it, and in part they do. I mean, in some cases that I report in the book, there are like literal descriptions where the guys are writing in these journals, "Oh, I knew she was attracted to me. You know, that's why she met me in the Xerox room just when I was there because she wanted to admire my bulging biceps," or whatever.
It's all about them.
And this gets into a bias that I talk about, which is the male sexual misperception bias, where a woman smiles at a man thinks, oh, she wants my body, she's attracted to me, and women are thinking, oh, I'm just being friendly, I'm being polite or professional. But these guys, high dark triad guys, are more susceptible to the sexual overperception bias, and they literally believe that the woman is attracted to them and sending them signals, green lights, to sexually approach. And so if you combine dark triad traits with the dispositional pursuit of a short-term mating strategy, that's an especially deadly combination. That's when you get sexual harassment, sexual coercion. So these are very bad dudes. Also predictors of intimate partner violence.
What approximate frequency in the male population are these have all three of the dark triad traits? And I realize that they're on a continuum. Sociopathy.
Yeah, that's why you can't say it, because they are on a continuum, and it's sort of arbitrary where you draw the line. But I think it's a minority of men. It's a subset of men who commit the vast majority of these acts of sexual violence, and that's why it's not like if you look at victims of sexual violence, they're more numerous than the perpetrators of sexual violence, because the perpetrators tend to be serial offenders, so to speak. One guy in the workplace harassing 15 different women, one guy sexually coercing, multiple women. So that's why you have in well-known cases in the news, like Harvey Weinstein, probably over 100 different women. Bill Cosby, Jeffrey Epstein, some of these more famous cases, these are a large number of victims, but pretty much sole, perpetrators. And there's no question that these guys, like Harvey Weinstein and Jeffrey Epstein, were definitely high on dark triad traits.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned stalking briefly.
All right, cool. So that's my clip.
All right, what's your take on it? What's your That's a good clip.
So I reached out to y'all back at the end of the year, because like you said, this is the beginning of the year, to possibly do this dialogue. So I didn't even expect to talk about what I'm talking about now, but something happened this week that made me pick out this clip, and I think this is something to talk directly to our culture, because again, we've just been talking about obviously listening to this clip and our reaction to it. So it's going to get very controversial now, in my opinion, based on what I want to say here. And I literally just got hit with this. Like, for example, I haven't paid attention to the Johnny Depp situation, right? Like, I haven't looked into any details outside of knowing that he's suing someone that abused him. I'm just telling you because I didn't want to look. I didn't have really any intentions to look too deep into it outside of and I think I may be right. I think I've surmised, because I haven't looked into it, that maybe this person played a role in maybe some of his opportunities in the past. I don't know if I'm factual about that.
Long-term partner. I think he married.
Okay.
Amber Heard.
Okay,
yeah,
gotcha.
they got married.
Okay, or whatever. And so I saw this today, and I'll tell you exactly what stands out to me in that clip, because what happened, I'll say this, there's a little more preface. I talk about what's said in this clip a lot. So it was so eye-opening for you to send me this clip, because I've been talking about the idea of how so few permeate a lot of the pain that we talk about when it comes to the protection of women in our culture. And so there have been, what I would say, tropes that we've accepted in our community that are not factual, because we never consider how the few harm so many, and then the idea of what we expect protection to be. And so that's where I want to go. But I'm gonna share this quote that I guess some woman shared recently in reference to the Johnny Depp situation. The quote is, "I've seen women do this, lie about rape, lie about domestic violence, reframe consensual activity as violation." So I don't know all the details, but for that quote to be sitting out there, I already know when we start talking about the term, is the Black woman protected, right? And we've done shows on this. So I picked this out to get into the deeper dialogue of what does that protection actually look like, because I already know when I see a quote like that, I understand that there are a lot of good brothers who attach to that quote because they know this is a reality, right? There's also men in the gender battle who are in a sense not protectors that will also attach to it or whatever to in a sense present a certain kind of way, and those men are doing it just to in a sense shit on women,
Right.
and I'm making that distinction because quite often decent brothers who are protectors and would not harm women, the conversation of protecting Black women has, and for them, has become a space where they feel like they cannot speak.
Oh yeah.
And so right now, this example, and again, I don't know all the details to the Johnny Depp situation, is a chance, in my opinion, to have the dialogue. And I wanted to have it with, again, two of the most intelligent people I think are out there. And so here's the trope, and I'll let y'all jump in. So we pretty much accept, and probably you've heard it, I've played it on the show, the quote where Malcolm X talks about the Black woman, if you will, is the most unprotected.
Unprotected. Yep.
And so now that trope continues to permeate, and most people accept it as is. Right. Now, on our show, when we talked about this, we did distinguish that when Malcolm X was using it the most, he was in a sense talking about how the system and police brutality, he was more focused on how there was very limited protection that could be provided to Black people in general, and especially the Black woman in the event that the police want to come in and harm.
Right.
So he's saying that as Muslims, we won't allow that. We'll stand up to the police specifically. So he was speaking to the larger context of the country when he was using that quote, right? So I think it's a fair assessment of what he meant. Now, when we float the quote, we are accepting it as an inner situation and saying that our sisters are not being protected by Black men. Of course, men who are protectors, and I know you've had this dialogue like this before, Maria, where the good brothers always are offended and don't want to accept that trope at all because they know that it doesn't fit. And the reason they know that it doesn't fit is because the reality is it is a few men. I'm not trying to make it like a minute number of men. Like you can put some more numbers on it. So, like for example, y'all probably have heard the stat of there's a woman raped every
so many seconds.
Okay, or whatever. And so, just to give context of where that comes from, unfortunately, that comes from the basically the average number of rapes in the country per year. It's like 250 that are convicted. Obviously, they can't speak to the women not convicted, right? So we know that number is actually higher, but they're just using the conviction number to even come up with that, right? So that number, it is a terrible number. It's absolutely terrible. But when you present it as 250,000 rapes and present it as every 60 seconds, there becomes this idea that there are a lot of men out here doing it. And believe it or not, that reality is less than 1% of men that are ever even in the situation going that far. And I'm not, and that video talks about coercion. So I'm not talking about just rape, but I'm just highlighting the rape, for example, as an example too, why men like to say, hey, this doesn't fit. But if you say that today, it's not received because there's this assumption that most men have been a part of something that has harmed Black women. That's what I think is out there. And that's why a lot of good brothers don't speak up when these conversations are had. Any thoughts on that?
Where you want to start? Or
it's interesting. This conversation, it's always intriguing for me because I know oftentimes when we talk about protecting Black women, we focus more on the violent acts, right? The acts of violence, which is very important that we do that because we know that these things do exist. We know that women are getting murdered for not giving a guy their phone number. We know that women are being taken advantage of at parties and things like that, right? So we know that those things exist, but I would also challenge us to think about protecting in the sense of emotional vulnerability. There are seemingly good men who will sleep with a woman that they know is emotionally vulnerable. Like they will know this woman has expressed to them, hey, I think I'm falling in love with you. I would love for us to be together. You're a great man. I feel safe with you. And this guy will know he has no intention whatsoever in doing anything with her beyond something sexual. And that's it. That is a very passive aggressive form of abuse, in my opinion, that we don't talk about when we bring up this conversation of protecting Black women. When we talk about the men who are married, for example, and they're having, locker room chat with the boys and they are commenting about other women that they're sleeping with. Now, I know that when we start getting into people's personal relationships, we don't know the dynamics of a relationship, right? Marriage is a very complex relationships. Intimate relationships are very complex, but I would challenge men to hold each other accountable and say, hey, bro, unless y'all getting down like that, I don't feel comfortable with you talking to me about these extra affairs, these extramarital affairs that you're having, because I believe in the protection of Black women, not only physically, but from an emotional perspective, right? And so I just think we might need to broaden that scope a little bit, or maybe not even broaden it, because I know oftentimes when we start doing that, certain things get muted over time. But maybe we need to kind of address this as a separate as a siloed conversation where we are protecting Black women in the sense of their emotional vulnerability as well. And honestly, I'm saying this in the context of the conversation because we are in fact talking about protecting Black women, right? But then we also know that there are women who are also passive aggressively abusing men's emotional vulnerability as well. Same thing. Man may share with her, hey, I'm really interested in you. I would like for us to, take our relationship to the next level. And she's in the meantime allowing him to buy her Louis bag. She's getting flued out, knowing she has no interest whatsoever in ever committing to this man. She doesn't want to be with him. She may not even want to have sex with him, right? So I think we have just got to get to a point where we can start not broadening, but maybe having this other conversation about what does it mean to protect Black women? What does it mean to protect Black men from an emotional perspective? And I see that aspect of the conversation oftentimes is not brought up. And, when we talk about good guys, I know a lot of exceptional men. Like, I'm very fortunate that there are a lot of men in my life who I call them my brothers. I love these guys, right? But when it comes to how they treat women from an emotional perspective, they're abusive. They're abusive. And I would literally say to them, she wants to be with you. Why are you doing this? Like, that this movie is gonna end tragically. We already know this. Why are you wasting our time? Same thing with my lady friends, and I'm gonna wrap it up, I promise.
No, go ahead.
No, this is perfect.
They're talking about a guy that is buying them a bunch of stuff, calling them all the time, whatever. And I'm like, cut it off. You don't like dude. Like, just cut it off. This movie is going to end tragically. Cut it off. Like, let him release these people so that they can go out here and find the person that is a better match for them. So I hope that didn't derail the
No, it doesn't at all. I love what you're saying. I want to let you finish. I love what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm done. I'm done now.
I want to highlight again the dialogue for how we talk inside of the culture. So what I offer, because again, I've done a show specifically on this, and so on that show, I explain that the men that you're talking about, the men that I'll say that I call them all in water. They're all in water, accountable. Let's say, and I said it on the show, so I'm saying the same way here. If we make the accountable men water and the unaccountable men oil, and so what I highlighted was people don't realize this, but that type of dynamic is literally all in water throughout our entire lives. And so that's what we misunderstand from a cultural standpoint. There are not men who are water that are part of those locker room conversations, believe it or not. And the reason I know this is because when we're immature, a lot of us are all, and if we've had any values, we'll eventually become water. It's always unique when a young man has been raised properly and he's water all his life. He always stands out. Some men do that, right? But if we had any values, we move to the water group. Okay, the all men may stay that to their 60. I'm just saying. And but the reason I'm pointing this out in the distinction of this conversation is the black woman protected, or like you said, offered fairly. It happens with men too. The reason that this matters so much is because once we become aware of that they're literally all in water, and here's the proof of it. Because when you don't want to be accountable, the last thing you want to do is hang around people that hold you accountable. Yeah. And the example I used on the show, and I don't know if you saw this, Maria, but I don't watch really any of these reality shows, but I heard about one of the hip hop and one of Love and Hip Hop. I think it was one of those shows where what's the guy that used to date Nicki Minaj? Safari. So that example here within the last year
where
his baby mother is at the hospital, I think, having a baby, and
his wife.
His wife. Okay. So whatever. I don't even know all the details. I don't watch it, but I heard enough of it to talk about it. So they fell out to the point where he's on having a trip, having fun, you know, whatever. And so outside looking in, everybody's going, why ain't the guys telling him to get back to her despite because she's having a baby? Like, it don't matter what the fallout is, right? And I'm saying this is very simple. He went on that trip with guys who won't say that.
Right.
So outside looking in, we have this concept that accountable men do participate in the locker room stuff. And I'm not saying men don't have locker room talk. That's not what I'm saying here.
Yeah.
Whatever. But even in the vein of, maybe you're cheating on your wife, that kind of stuff, you still know who to say that to. So even if you've never done it, right? But the men that are in that circle, you do have those men who are going to do exactly what you do. The reason you do what you do amongst your girls is because you are who you are. And so, there was the example you gave, like, that ain't cool. So what if they're going to keep doing it, you know what they're going to do? They're not coming around Marie because they know Marie going to check them. And so the reason that this matters so much when we start talking about the protection is because the example you just gave, we think that it's happening more in the culture than it actually is. There's a level of immaturity where those things go on very much so. But most of the culture is not doing that just based on just the age of our culture at this point, believe it or not. Most people are not doing that. But we accept that as it's part of the culture, and we just say it. And the things that you verbally say they grow. They grow. So it matters that we make this distinction. And it's not just to let them off the hook, but now you have to get it if you understand that different dynamic. And here's the last thing, and I'll let y'all jump in. So what I ultimately said on the show as far as the actual violence, because it was a good distinction, Maria. So obviously it's easy to talk about it from the violence standpoint, but to your credit, there's a continuum here of just emotional protection all the way down to obviously the worst case scenarios of rape and violence and things of that nature. But I did want to highlight, and I said this on that show, for those who are violent, which is a minority, that our culture, the best way to handle this is how every other culture in America handles it, which is just simply to call the police. I was calling out our culture on the most violent situation is because of our precarious situation in our community. We make the mistake of our precarious relationship with the police. We make the mistake, our very own women sometimes will get harmed and make the mistake of not calling the police because of culturally how we see that dynamic. So they're allowing more harm to come because it's culturally taught not to use the police. And so then there becomes this idea that random brothers and sisters kind of come to the rescue. No other culture is being asked to do that. They literally just call the police. And so that was the deeper context that I gave on the show for our community to understand. When it comes to people that are harming people, there should be no protection, whether that's women or even down to our children with sexual violence, because we still will keep that in house as a culture if we're honest about that, due to our precarious relationship with the police. We still are not as quick to call as we should. There's no other cultures in this country that's not calling the police immediately. So that's why this is a deeper conversation, in my opinion, when it comes to what does that trope look like. We just keep putting it out there and are not honest about what the solution looks like. We think the solution is accountable people being accountable, and we're literally all in water all our lives. And we don't recognize that very true dynamic. Michael, I said a lot there. Go ahead and jump in, King.
First of all, I want to thank Maria for finally giving a definition to protect Black women that wasn't at the extreme, and is one that actually can challenge me at a personal level, because again, I'm one of the brothers that when I see that conversation online, I go elsewhere. And I'll tell you why, because like I told you before, I've been married 15 years. I know what that looks like. I know intimately what the battle within the relationship to keep that. I have three children, 3 girls, who I worry about, again, incessantly. I think about, all these things, and I go, well, I'm doing my part, but you hit on something about, and it's not necessarily accountability in a certain sense, because again, my inner circles, those brothers, we getting it. They make me better. But I will tell you the one thing that you just challenged. Simple challenge. You said protect Black women by holding yourselves accountable. And I went to my head. First thought in my head, I'll give it to you. My loyalty is to him, not her. And I went, why? My loyalty is to my brother, who I've spent, again, a lot of these brothers, I've known y'all for years. I know people for these, my blood bond to some of these guys is to them. And it goes to one of those things, you start weighing on the scale. Well, do I know, it becomes an easier out for me, whether it's right or wrong. It goes easier out for me to say, well, what he's doing is fine because I know him. He's of good character. He's a good brother, right? What he's choosing to do is whatever. And again, I would, if I ever fell ill on that too, I would hope that they would hold me to the same grace, that kind of thing. But there's a challenge. Now, I will tell you the one reason why we always joke about this in, anytime you're talking about extramarital stuff, is we made it to a level now to where we go, all we say to each other is half. Is it worth half? That clears the queue of the conversation real quick. If you're not, and that's not to say, oh, I'm not a Puff Daddy or Jay-Z. No, I'm not there. But half for me would sting. Half for me would irrevocably sting and change my lifetime. If you get what I'm saying.
All the effort we done put in getting out the whole thing.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Give away half for a silly moment.
Exactly. For a silly half is a deterrent. And then we get into the structures of marriage and the legal boundaries to that becomes a possible thing, because if you look at that in a certain sense, that can be good or bad. But it's like, again, I go back to the whole thing about there's an underlying competition. And I used to always say, well, there's no competition between men and women. There is. You just kind of highlighted an inkling of it that I hadn't even thought about. That's, again, like I said, to run around background processing. It was like, well, if I'm thinking about, how to protect Black women, how to protect mine, or the ones that I haven't seen in my community as a whole, because I say that's part of my whole goal of having a family in the first place, is we want to be, outside of our own happiness and yada, 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 wife and kids, that means more. But at the extension of that, if we're not challenging, how do we have those conversations? How do we better that, that point? Because I always say perfection is not necessarily a point, it's a process. How do we make that process better? And you just really, you just blew the cover. Like when you first said that, I was like, oh, and granted, yeah, I can think in my own time how many, you bought something for somebody, it goes back, I can go back to 3rd grade and tell you about some of the, that kind of stuff. But, in the relevant scheme of things, the consequences of what we do, men to women, women to men, especially in the Black community, which, like I say, some of these things are universal, no matter what, you're blue, green, purple, white, whatever. But in our community that needs more of the togetherness that does come with familial bonds, I think what you just said about being able to emotionally be accountable, have some integrity, it's not easy. I'm going to tell you just off the cuff, because if I can tell you at 42, but if I switch those numbers to 24, I'm like, get out of my face with that. I'm like, again, because I'm seeing like the Dr. Buss said, there's a low risk opportunity here. She said she vulnerable. Mm-hmm. That's my nature. I'm about to. Right. That's done.
And I love the distinction you just made in the age thing. And I'm not trying to make it okay.
Yeah,
I'm highlighting, and I'm not trying to do that whole show all over again.
Yeah.
But I highlighted that at 24, it don't matter if Maria said it. I could be 48 right now and say it to the 24-year-old Michael. Right. And what I said on the show is, because you are stuck in your immaturity, you're going to dismiss it anyway. So I'm not trying to make it okay. I'm just trying to get a picture of what we think accountability actually looks like. Right. And what I end up saying, that's why it ends up, why we, in a sense, have to get back to family structures, because your most influence is on your children. You can raise your son to be what Maria said, more so than you can check your boy or whatever. And then the other reality, when you just talk about cheating alone, if we're not making it a violent situation, right? If it's just cheating alone, well, people have the guiltiness of, well, I did it at one point too. So even though they've gotten past it and matured past it, then they like to be careful to try to check somebody else. That's just a reality of it, and it's where but we actually are vitriol towards each other, saying we don't do this.
Right. With the truth,
a vitriol way that we're telling this to the babies. Exactly. And so it grows, in my opinion, it's not as big as we say it is. But if we don't ever get into the nuance of what protection actually looks like, to Maria's point, that being accountable too, because more people hearing what Maria says is a seed to get to that space sooner.
Yep. It's non-zero. It's non-zero, but it's too much. That's kind of thing. It's not like the majority are doing it, but the effects, you feel it, but it's not, it's way too many people perpetuating that than not.
So that's why that stood out to me. So that's all I got. Thank y'all for y'all time. I already took an hour and 20 minutes of y'all time. And so other than that, if there's anything y'all want to say to close it out, just thank you. I just wanted to, again, just dialogue, and I'm going to cut this thing up because I know it was different laws or whatever, but I'm going to cut it up and use it throughout the year from time to time. But I just appreciated the opportunity to, just have a, honest dialogue about that information.
Oh, one last thing I would say, this is an ask, and so Maria, you can bat it away if you want to, but I would say, again, I wouldn't even say a redefinition, but really telling brothers what it means to protect Black women. You did it in one line for me, but I'm like, we could do almost an entire new set on that, because I think that it goes, I know for me, like my head is abuzz with what you just said. I mean, one line was enough, and I go, well, what if she said three things? What does that start to shift, and where can I influence where I can to start that dynamic? Because that's typically where it starts, because it's just you help me understand better,
Yeah, I love that conclusion when you think about what this reactionary video, the entirety of it, because it ended talking about sexual violence, which was the clip we played. So this is a beautiful way to even end this dialogue. So yeah, Maria, you could even try to expound on what it looks like just from your relative personal experience. I do agree, more of us need to hear it. That's the better dialogue than just being accusatory of one another, both sides of it. So I would love to close the video out with your thoughts. Thank you, Queen, for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you both for being on the call. Montoya, thank you for the invitation. Michael, of course, is always great, engaging with you and us having great conversation. And then also thank you both for your willingness to hear this perspective, right? Knowing that, also just want to be very clear, I'm certainly not the spokeswoman of Black American women, right? So just want to put that out there. Some Black women probably upset with what I'm about to say. But I would just say to that end, just from a cultural perspective, because when I think of culture, Black Americans, we literally drive global culture. Globally, right? And this didn't really resonate with me until recently in conversation with one of my clients and dear friends who is from an African country. And he shared with me that when he and his family talk about America, they don't even talk about, they're not even thinking about America in terms of like white Americans. They're only thinking about Black people in America. They don't even think about, like, their reference point for discussions about America are with relation to Black people. And so this is actually more common and more prominent than maybe we are aware of. And I think the reason why that is so important is because we have really got to understand, whether we agree with this or not, that we really are the drivers of global culture. Black Americans we're the pioneers of global culture, especially as it relates to entertainment. And so with that being said, we've got a responsibility to handle that with caution, meaning I would task anyone listening to this, we've really got to get a grip on the way in which our entertainers are disrespecting women, I think we've got to come to terms with that. And we've got to be more proactive and more intentional about combating that. And, you know, the irony in this is almost similar to when you think about domestic violence and oftentimes where the victim, let's say a woman, for example, right? The police come to arrest her abuser and she's crying and pleading with the cops. No, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. And then they stay in this cycle. I look at our relationship to pop culture the same way, where sometimes you all as advocates of, hey, protect Black women, even in the way that we communicate about our dealings with Black women, there will be women, Black women, who are going to probably call you simps. They will probably say, you know, oh, this dude here, he just talking, you know, he just wants some attention. He just wants a mic in front of his face, whatever. There will be Black women protecting the very men who are basically ruining our reputation globally and minimizing our worth. And so I just want to let you know that despite that, we still have to keep marching forward, because I've had this conversation with women. I've talked to women about how disgusting it is to me that we are now calling each other out of our names when we're addressing one another. And if we're honest about it, that is largely driven by how we have been referenced in pop culture, period. And so it's very problematic for me. I don't address my women friends that way. Right. And it's interesting because it's so interesting to me that I've never really just told my friends, like, yeah, I don't want you calling me out my name. Like, I'm not going to call you out your name. Don't call me out my name. But literally all of them just know. Like, my friends, if they accidentally say, like, they literally go, my bad. And I've never had to be like, no, don't call me that. Don't do that. I don't do that. But they just know. And I think we've just got to set a different standard about how we are talking about women on a global level. And, you know, and I hate to bring this guy up because I really just don't like him, but I know people are obsessed with him. But like Snoop Dogg, I know he didn't start it. He ain't.
Right.
Like, I just have a problem with how we Black people, we've elevated him, and now mainstream just obsesses over this guy. And this is the same man who has been married for decades. We didn't even know the man had a wife, and brought two women to a red carpet event with dog collars around their necks. Like, did he ever apologize for that? I mean, seriously, like we've got to get to a point where we are really holding these entertainers with these large stages and these large platforms accountable to how they are portraying Black women, who oftentimes when they're getting started, they're talking about us. Like, they may go off and go marry, you know, the Puerto Rican or whatever, but they are building their fan base off of the abuse of Black women. And we've got to be more honest about that. And we've got to challenge the notion of us supporting these individuals and giving them like a larger stage by playing their music and all of that. So I'm off my soapbox now.
I love it. I remember one post I put out maybe a couple years ago, maybe longer, where I just said that unfortunately the African American community lost the day it became commercially favorable to refer to our women as bitches.
Yep.
The whole community lost. When it became commercially favorable, because and I highlight the commercially favorable from the standpoint of you're never going to get away from the human dynamic of that. There's going to be that dynamic of the dichotomy of the street life to the corporate life or whatever.
Right.
So there's nothing wrong with that existing in reality, because that's just the reality of it. But for it to become commercially okay was the moment.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? Because the human dynamic never takes that away. Again, I don't refer to women as that, but at the same time, you know, I don't use the word, you know, nigga no more, but I grew up saying it relatively easily and very, you know what I mean? So there's a process, there's a maturity that's fine on an individual basis, but for it to commercially become viable, not even okay, it became commercially viable. And that's an issue for our community. So thank you for those thoughts. Go ahead, Michael.
I was going to say, relating it back, just quick relating it back to what we were talking about with the original video. I would not be in a long-term relationship with one that referred to herself as, you know, so take that with whatever data point that is, you know, that's right. There's something to that. So
absolutely. All right. Well, thank y'all. It's been wonderful. I hope y'all enjoyed it as much as I did.
Great. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care.
Y'all be good. Peace.